Welcome, everyone. It's great to have everybody join us today. So we're going to be talking about effective parent advocacy today, and I, yeah. So we're going to be talking about the advocacy in terms of what you need to know and how you go about doing it. So okay, let's go on to the next slide. First of all, Matrix Parent Network and Resource Center, we're a federal parent training and information center through the U.S. Department of Education. We're a California Family Resource Center through the California Department of Developmental Services, and we're a California Family Empowerment Center through the California Department of Education. And what we do is empower families of children with special needs to successfully understand and access the systems that serve them. We want you to become successful advocates and role models for your children. So what we're going to leave here knowing today is what an advocate is. And this is going to be in terms of special education advocacy and what you need to know in order to become that advocate. What are the skills and strategies needed to be an effective parent advocate? The techniques to use before, during, and after your next IEP, whether it's in person or virtual, and why collaboration is the key to successful advocacy at all times. And so going back to the one about the skills strategies needed, there's really three of them that we're going to talk about, and this not necessarily in order, but it's your training that you need, ongoing information that you need, and then also the diligence, the kind of the doggedness that you need to pursue this whole thing. As far as the techniques to use before, I'm just sorry, we'll go back to this for a second. The techniques you use before and during and after an IEP, and we'll go into these in the course of the training, and we'll get not too specific in this training, but you'll get some good ideas with that. Okay. So slide 6, what is an advocate? So an advocate is someone who pleads the cause of another or promotes the interests of a cause or group. You advocate every day. And have you ever met with your child's teacher about any issue? Have you questioned a medical professional on issues concerning yourself or your child? And if you've done any of these things, you've already been an advocate. But really, the primary difference between the type of advocacy that you may have done in the past may have not been based on a high level of knowledge. And I think that's really the difference. And that's where we are promoting. When you met with your child's special education teacher, for instance, did you understand what the data meant that was taken on a goal that was written? Or did you know that data on goals needs to be objective with real numbers showing real progress and not subjective as we often see on IEPs? So that's really the difference between that advocacy that's kind of that raw feeling advocacy, and then the knowledge-based one, which I think is the one that we're talking about today. And this is slide 7, slide 8. Okay, skills and strategies. So let's go ahead. I think this is just the presentation slide. Okay. So the thing with skills and strategies, the main thing with that in special education is that you really need to know how the system works. Not what happens if you know this when you go into an IEP meeting and all the specialists go around and introduce themselves and you're not quite sure what they do and how they're relating to your child. There's all the technical talk about present levels and goals. And so it's kind of like being on the outside looking in, where we want you to be on the inside as part of that conversation. So the first one, use your understanding of your child. You know your child the best. And no matter how many times the school says they're testing and their observations and their interactions with your child, that they know your child, they don't. No matter how many tests are given, no matter if a teacher thinks they know them, you are supremely more informed. And so don't let reports or outside opinions, that parent that talked about a child with an emotional disability and that judgment, don't let that define how you're looking at it, because your reality is you know your child the best. Learn about systems and the key players. First, in a district, who's in charge of special education in your district, at your school? Get to know the school secretary, which is always a big thing. Get to know the secretary in the special education director's office. They're usually the most powerful people in the district. Who do you contact when you want to call an IEP? How do you request records? How do you lodge a complaint? All of these things, and just knowing how to do these things, even if you don't have to implement them or use them, becomes very valuable because you could just frame the way you speak from that place of knowledge. Stay current on special education. Try to stay organized. In special education, always follow the rule that if it isn't written down, it doesn't exist. Almost everything that you do in special ed has to be done in writing, and so just assume that it has to be in writing. And then what I recommend parents to do is that if you have an email string or if you have an issue going on, just put those emails in a folder for later use. You'll be interested in how often it comes up that you're going to need emails to be able to go back and to look at things that happened in the past. So yeah, that's a good thing to do. You can keep conversations by month. Anything that kind of organizes your communication with the school is important, just because it's so hard to go back and remember the sequence of these things. Clear and compassionate communication is important. The clear communication is under your control. So you should present yourself as your child's advocate. The thing I don't recommend, and this is just from experience, and when I was working as a coordinator in a district, I chaired about 2,000 IEP meetings. And the one thing that takes away from the focus on your child is focusing on yourself. So what I always recommend is to, although you can certainly show emotion at an IEP meeting, you're not supposed to be professional. I do recommend that just keep the focus on your child, because that's where you're going to get the most kind of bang for your buck in terms of the time you're spending. Um, the other thing is to make sure, and this again is a basis of knowledge, make sure that the IEP steps are being followed. The first thing to make sure that they're legally compliant. You should have your parent concerns as the first thing after introductions are done, that you express what you want to have happen in that meeting. Then there's certain steps that are followed in an IEP depending on what type of meeting it is. The compassion part on this, I have to say, is a two-way street. And I unfortunately recently I go to quite a few IEP meetings. I go to 2 or 3 IEP meetings a week. And again, I'm not sure if it's me or I am seeing a sense of um, I guess a lack of grace on the part of some members of IEP teams these days. And so that the compassion and going towards someone um, it has to be two ways. It can't be one way. So with that, don't put yourself out there if someone is, not being as kind to you as they should be. And just another word on that, people that work in education are first and foremost professionals, and they should never let their personal feelings get in the way of either professional judgment or the way they're treating a parent. A parent always deserves to have the respect of the person, the professional that's working with them. So again, I just enough said on that, I guess. Recognize perspectives. Um, Another thing I'm finding today, excuse me, is that there seems to be a lot. And again, I have to say that I'm kind of jaded with this, because the cases that we see are the ones that parents call us about. They're the ones that are having difficulty with the school. These are not the cases where the programs are working perfectly. There are issues. And so in my career, these are the ones I always worked with, and these are the ones I have now. So my perspective is from the problematic perspective of special education. So, take what I say with that grain of salt. But one thing I found is that there's a lack of something that's called theory of mind. And in autism, the definition generally, but particularly in autism, you find it is that theory of mind is being able to see something from another person's perspective. It's just, the idea that people with autism don't have that innately with them. They can't see things from other people's perspective, and they have to be trained to be able to do that, taught to be able to do that. And I do find that I don't know if it's generally in society or just with the pressure that's on the education system these days, but I find that lack of seeing something from a parent's perspective, it's tough what you're going through. You're not getting the communication you want sometimes. You're not knowing what's happening with your child at school. And these are, stressful things for you. And I find that there's not the level of, again, of I, grace, I guess that's, the way I would put, of that civility, that, um, yeah, okay. Um, and again, it's in a minority of cases, but what I do find is that lack of civility goes along with a lack of communication. And that is a lack of respect. And I find that a lack of communication between parents, particularly between the school and parents, the outgoing communication, is the cause of 80 or 90% of the problems we deal with. If everybody talked and they just opened up, that it would just be, maybe, I think, solve things. I don't know. And just with that said, the district I told you where I chaired all those IEP meetings was a district in a very wealthy area of Los Angeles, and almost all the meetings I went to, because they were difficult meetings, had attorneys at them or advocates, and a lot of times they'd have both. And because there was legal representation for the parents, and we were under that microscope in terms of producing data and real programs, we had the most honest and open conversations that I ever had in an IEP meeting, because there was no sense in trying to cover anything up, because everybody could read the data. They had all experts, and everybody knew what this stuff meant. And so we had real constructive, meetings that got things done. And when I find these meetings where people are being defensive and they're not opening up, and you see the general education teacher in the corner trying not to say anything because they're afraid to get in trouble, I find that very disturbing, because these meetings are supposed to be open conversations. And there have been a couple times in meetings, I guess, over the last year, and as I get older, I feel more free to do this, is I just say, can we just have a conversation, please? And just stop, beating around the bush. So, if you're feeling that, that's not unusual. It's pretty common. Okay, and then where did I leave off here? Recognize perspective, solve problem creatively to resolve disagreements. Um, again, just that whole collaborative idea. Again, the other thing I find a lot of times these days, and you might run into it, is that special education is supposed to be a creative science. We're not supposed to be tied to a district regulation or some kind of a program that a child's in. It's supposed to use all of the resources that are available to us. And what I find a lot of times, particularly in high school students, is that lack of flexibility on the part of schools to mix and match things to put together a good program for a child. I've had a case this morning just before this training, where the parent of a high school student with autism wants to put together kind of a hybrid program where the child goes and does auto mechanics because he's really good at auto mechanics, and then he does independent study at home sometimes, and then he's doing counseling at school and doing social skills. And the psychologist that was talking to him said she'd really like to talk to me, because I was kind of talking to dad about this, and to say, well, we can't do that because the district doesn't have programs like that. And it's always like, on the one side, you've got special education law, which is federal law that has been adjudicated at the Supreme Court level for many years. And then you have some district policy about their independent study. And it's like, come on, man. This is like, that doesn't make any sense. And so this lack again of that ability to be creative and resolve those disagreements, know that you can do that sort of thing in special education. And the last one is practice self-care. And, I- that's totally a personal thing for me. Self-care is going out and causing trouble. And so trying to make changes. Everybody's, idea of self-care is something different, but please do, because, you know, one thing with special education, I remind people, is that in most cases, about 85 or 90% of cases, when a child leaves the school system, they no longer have a disability. So all of those kids with speech and language issues, or learning disabilities, or emotional disturbances, or other health impaired for ADHD, they're not going to say they're disabled for the rest of their life. They don't have a disability. It's school based. And so remember that a lot of the issues that these children have is that they're neurodivergent. They learn in a different way, and the school system doesn't teach the way that they learn. And so a lot of these problems that you're dealing with now, once these kids get into society and get out of school, they're going to do fine because they're going to find what they do well. Our one of my colleagues had a son who with ADHD who told me he had a heck of a time getting through school and got through school. And now he's this amazing woodworker who does these incredible works of art. And so, it wasn't a fit. And so remember that self-care, part of it is recognizing the fact that even though your child may be neurodivergent for life, they it's okay because they're going to find their place. Okay. All right, let's go on to the next one. So your experience are valuable and maybe used to improve things, but only if you share with your team. Um, you know when something is working or not working, and you have ideas that might make things better. Uh, a common issue I find with this, just to give you an example, has to do with homework. Um, for a lot of kids with disabilities, including two of my grandchildren that I work with that had disabilities, doing homework is an absolute nightmare. And so what I see in terms of accommodations is that you can accommodate for homework. You can reduce it or you can even eliminate that sort of thing. So if something's not working, if you're fighting with your child every night for 2 hours of homework to get 15 minutes of work done, that's ridiculous. And so, don't let the school say, this is the way we do things. The child has to do all their homework. That's just not true. So there's all kinds of things you can do with it. So these kind of problems pop up. And if you're feeling it and seeing it that that's not a tenable situation, you can fix it. And even if it's not understanding you from the school, you can make your point and get those changes made as you need to get them made. You have ideas about how to make things better. You know what your child likes. You know what motivates them. You know what makes them crazy. Your input in this area is important, just as it is with all of these points. So if, for instance, your child has some behavior issue and you know a trigger for them is a loud noise. And so you're sharing with that team, how can we fix this in advance? Because I got to give you this information about my child because you don't want your child to be experiencing that stress and the people around them not knowing that that's the issue that your child has. And if you can observe, learn, and communicate, how does disability affect aspects of life? How does your child handle stress? Do they escape? Do they lash out? What happens out in the community? How is it when there are no demands being made? How safe is home for your child? One of the things I find, particularly with kids with autism, is that there's a real need to have a real separation between school and home. That home needs to be a safe place where the school just doesn't intrude because it's such a stressful experience sometimes. And so those are the kind of things that you could look at and, think about, again, outside the box with these. Okay. And how does the disability manifest itself in your own child? Um, and so this is really the symptoms of your child disability. And so it's not necessarily the disability itself, it's just what reflects to society. How do they reflect that disability in a stressful setting, which school often is? How do they reflect that disability at home, which would be oftentimes completely different in the community? So, you know, the school is seeing one dimension of your child, and they are seeing a dimension that's usually under stress because school is not a natural environment for a lot of our kids. Okay. All right. Now we go on to the next slide. Okay. Your observations are important. You can keep a journal of what works and what doesn't work when you interact with your child. We spoke earlier about the importance of writing things down. But having your own data can help your IEP team agree to appropriate accommodations, help with behavior plans and with goals. So if you find your child is reacting to a certain stimulus at home, you can share that with the team. You can collect data on when those stress points maybe happen. You don't have to collect, formal data, but if you know that when you go to the grocery store, when something's going on, you're in a particular aisle, that your child seems to experience stress, and you know that's because um, I know they have a food allergy, something on that aisle that you know that's a stress point for them. And so that's important for the team to know it because those stressors are going to appear at school, sometimes in a more intense form because of the more stressful situation. You can take videos of your child learning to illustrate how they handle homework. And I hadn't seen this or I hadn't thought of this idea before I read this in the training. It's a great idea. Um, yeah, the picture's worth 1,000 words or 1,000 screams in the case of doing homework sometimes. And so seeing, 2 minutes of that was, okay, that's enough of that. Um, so you can share your observations and thoughts with the teachers and the IEP team. Again, having your own notes and documentations is critical so you can point back. This is a time that I saw this happen with my child. I think that's what's happening at school now. Can we discuss that? It's those sorts of things. And by the way, again, kind of a side note with this, and it does go along with this next one about helping teachers understand how well your student understands instructions. Are they completing homework independently? What kind of learner is your child? Do they need more visuals? And so what I'm going to say around all this is that if there should be an open communication between teachers and parents. One thing that teachers are afraid of is that they're going to get into a back and forth email string with a parent that's going to be, hours of time that they may not have, particularly with a general education teacher. So what I would say to you is that, yes, you deserve to have an answer from a teacher, a legitimate answer that's well thought out. But it just, you don't have to have 5 back and forths. It could be something you have a specific question about, and they should give you a good, full answer to that. Professionally, I always mandated myself and people that work for me return emails within 24 hours maximum. Never beyond. Even if I got back to a parent or somebody gets back to a parent saying, I don't have an answer for you, we're still working on it, that you get back to that parent at some time and then give them an estimate of time it's going to take to get it done. This idea that nobody's getting back to you is just not appropriate. And so this idea of helping teachers understand your student, that is going to depend on having that open communication. So if you have to push a bit to get that done, that's okay. That's, their bosses wouldn't want them neglecting their parents either. Okay. Um, all right, so skills, systems, key players. Okay, so let's go on to the next one. All right. Um, so this is just about who people are. So kind of the part of the training that we talked about, special education in kind of a general sense or more of a holistic sense. This is going to be more specific in terms of kind of who does what. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but the one thing I do want to note, and we'll see a slide in this later that we may skip, but it's always important when you're working in a school district because they are an institution and they have institutional kind of norms. Always start at the lowest level. Anyway, so start at the lowest level. If you're in special education, you start with the case manager. Then you can go possibly to the principal, and then you would go to the district office. So go up those steps because what happens inevitably, and it would happen with me, is that if it came from a parent and it was a case, something I knew nothing about, I would automatically send it back. Please talk to the teacher so that I could talk to the teacher and get some background information and get a fuller picture. What happens is that you're going to end up telling your story 5 times to 5 different people, and it just doesn't work that way. So you're just better off. You're building that kind of bridge, I guess, of information that so everybody's on the same page when it gets to the right place. So with that, we're going to kind of start at the top here. So school districts, you'll have directors of special education. Depending on the size of the school district, um, and there's an awful lot of small school districts, and I know we have quite a few people from Sonoma County here today. And in those really small school districts, I'm working with one right now where the superintendent is the actual director of special education because there's 1 or 2 schools in the district. It depends. And then the next size up would be where they have someone called a pupil personnel services director, and you may have in your district, you may have that. I had a job like that one time, and that job encompasses special education, but it also encompasses all the health programs in the district, attendance, discipline, and a whole range of community programs usually. So it's a in smaller districts, you'll find people wear more hats. And as it gets bigger, they become more specialized. So in a larger district, like when I was a coordinator, I was the secondary coordinator for special education. And then we had an elementary coordinator, and then we had an assistant director and a director. And then that was a pupil personnel services. And then I ended up as a special education director where I had assistant directors because that was a relatively large district. So it depends on the district. And again, the smaller the district, the closer you are to the person who's at the top of the decision-making ladder. A special education local plan area, if you don't know what that is, read about your local one. Sonoma County has their own SELPA. These are state mandated agencies, and they act as kind of a combination of things. All of the funding for special education, for instance, goes through SELPAs to school districts. Regulations go through them, and then school district adapt them. They do a lot of training. The SELPA director's main job is to support school district special education directors. So they work closely with them, but they're kind of an overarching agency. Um, and those are good to know because if you have issues, you'll probably go to your SELPA to get some resolution. And so it's good to know who they are. One of the really good things they have are what are called community advisory committees, and they meet usually quarterly. And so, and those are great. When I was a director and even a coordinator, I'd go to those meetings because the feedback you get from parents there is just really great. And I will say that they do have power in certain counties. I was in Ventura County for most of my career, and the CAC there had real power that was able to influence policy. So they're often very good. Um, okay, so the California, each one has a community advisory committee. We've had a little issue with Vallejos. If anybody's from Vallejo here, they've keep canceling them, and I keep pushing them, and they keep putting them back on. So we're prodding them a little bit. Um, and then there's also a California Special Education Advisory Commission. And then the California State Department of Education Board. I have not had any experience with either of those. I know that you can join them, but I don't know. I imagine they're talking about policy at a higher level, but I'm just not that familiar with them. So I can't say for sure. Okay. Social Security Administration, a lot of times children are applying for SSI, throughout the time. So that's just a link there. Regional supports, there are in-home support services. And then regional centers, we have two regional centers in our area, the Golden Gate Regional Center, which covers Marin County, and then also the North Bay Regional Center, which covers our other three counties. And a lot of you may have children that are in the regional center. We work pretty closely with them. We get a lot of referrals from them and asking us to help with their services. We also get a lot of referrals from places like Kaiser and other medical facilities for the parents needing help. Um, and then county mental health and human services. Okay. Um, so you can reach out to your case manager for every agency that you interact with. So if you're with regional center, you of course will have a case manager. In special education, there's always a case manager. So all of these agencies will have someone who's organizing and is responsible for your case. You can also reach out to the director or decision maker for each organization that supports your child. And when I was a director, I didn't go to IEP meetings, but what I did do is I sat down with any parent that wanted to talk to me. And I never refused a meeting, and I always put those as a priority. That's not true with everyone, but you can speak with these people, and they will make changes. I see things at the school level where a principal or a school staff just what they're doing, where I know the director knows what they're doing. And so the parent going to that person and just presenting this is what's happening. And the director goes, oh my God, I had no idea this was going on. Let's change that. That happens more often than you think. Again, with that, going up the ladder. Okay. One thing I will say, as far as a tip to going into an IEP meeting, and this is kind of in the same vein, what I always recommend parents to do is to write down what they want to talk about at the IEP meeting, because inevitably what happens, you get there, the introductions will happen, and there's 10 people around the table and you go, I want to cover, and then, it's really difficult to kind of maintain that. So you're supposed to be emotional at these meetings at times. It's expected. So when you're emotional, you're not thinking as clearly as you would. It's like sitting in the IRS office or something, or sitting in a doctor's office, I guess, that you're not thinking as clearly as you normally would. So write this stuff down so you don't forget it. And then you have a right to make a statement at the beginning during your parent concerns. I've had parents give the statements as long as an hour one time. This is very unusual, but a 5 or 7 or 8 minute statement is not wrong if you want to get certain things out. So um, that helps frame these meetings. And even if you number them or put dash marks, and what I would do in a meeting, because I always took notes, is at the end of the meeting, I said, here was the items you mentioned at the beginning. Did we cover all of those to your satisfaction? And then I would read the notes back to the team to make sure everybody agreed to the notes. So that's just a tip in terms of making the IEP meeting more centered on what you want to talk about. Okay. Yeah, okay, pass that, I think. Pass that up. Use humor. I don't know. Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Um, One thing that don't rehash the past. I will talk about that. One thing that don't get stuck on something that happened a year ago. Um, it's just not going to make you go forward if you've dealt with that issue um, to the best of your ability. If you filed a complaint, whatever you've done with that, argued about it, it's water over the bridge, and you're just not going to be able water over the dam. You're not going to be able to address that, and it does take away from the current issues, which I'm sure are going to be critical at that point. Okay. And practice flexibility. Yeah, that's the whole key to special ed. I had a poster over my office door at one time, and it said, it depends. And anybody that ever asked me a question about special education, I would just point up there. And every child is so different from every other child. Every IEP should be completely different or significantly different from every other IEP. And so flexibility is key, particularly for staff members, because they're dealing with a lot of different children, but also for you to look at things with an open mind.